Let's just start by saying it's tough. It's not an easy thing to do. You have accepted the fact that you and your now ex-partner no longer agree on certain things. You don't see eye to eye on certain things, hence why you're probably no longer together. So now when it comes to potentially, and for the most part, the most important things in both of your lives, of course, there is going to be conflict upon how you raise your children. Now, if you agree that when you were together, what happens is two people who have been brought together from different backgrounds, who are raised very differently as children, now come together and raise their children. And so one suggests this, the other suggests that, and somewhere along the line there's a compromise, and that's then how you guys are raising your kids. Of course, the moment you now separate, that essentially goes out the window. And so you now have absolute autonomy to raise your children however you see fit. What you must accept up front, of course, is that your ex-partner has the exact same autonomy to raise them however they see fit. Now, I get a lot of questions about, well, what if, when the child is with him, the child's actually spending more time with his mum than the child is with him? Common question, right? But the truth of the matter is that by the time, if we're talking about courts in terms of co-parenting, a court won't necessarily see that as a bad thing. What you have to agree upon is that when you're separated, the time that you get with the children is your time to do whatever you want with. And if that means letting them spend more time with extended family, your parents or your sisters, brothers, friends, whomever you like, then again, it's not going to be a valid argument as to why you or the other person should get more or less time. So you have to, from the start, acknowledge the fact that you no longer have any impact or authority or power or control over what your ex-partner does in terms of the raising of your children. You also, like I said to start off with, have to know that that is equally true of you. And therefore, your ex-partner, are unable to essentially comment, dictate, choose whatever your parenting type, your parenting preference, if you like. So that is really essential to know from the start. Now, where I would go from there is to say boundaries. It's really, really important that you set boundaries. Boundaries, I believe, start with respect. Respect for yourself, respect for other people. Now, with your ex-partner, of course, you will have to know what boundaries you are setting in terms of communication. When they message you, how quickly you need to respond. When you message them or call them, how quickly they need to respond as far as you're concerned, and your expectation of that. Expectations are a big one as well. You need to massively adjust your expectations of this person. They're no longer on your clock. They don't necessarily owe you anything. And what should, again, be at the forefront of all of your thinking when it comes to co-parenting is your children. Your children have to be at the forefront, because that's now, in theory, the only reason you need to be in communication with your ex-partner. And so therefore, your thinking needs to be constantly based on the well-being of the children. Is this decision that I'm making good for them? Is this moment to either speed up communication for them? Is this reason to slow down communication, take a second to breathe and to respond rather than react? Is that for them? And so I would say that the number one thing of importance here is to keep the children first. Keep them first in your mind. Keep them first in how you interact with your ex-partner. Now, let's also agree that this person is the mother or father of your children, right? So respect is massively, massively important, because you're raising children who are looking at you and how you conduct yourself in relationships. And they are learning from you and how you will conduct yourself in relationships. So even if it's a case of, and I really dislike this idea, but even if it's a case of, as a parent, you just don't want your child to like the other parent, that's perhaps what you may get on the surface, but what you don't understand is by the time you've raised an adult who now may also be raising their children to despise their co-parent, their father, their mother. They may not have a great relationship with their grandparents or their extended family. And again, what you should try to see is that if you're not careful with certain decisions, your children may suffer long term. Now, I'm not saying you may see them waking up crying every day, but psychologically, the lack of family, eventually, the lack of connections, the lack of respect, eventually to a young person leads to questions, right? It either leads to questions or it leads to behavioral dysfunctions. So you are setting an example for your children by the way you co-parent and how you co-parent. And, you know, we could argue that kids try to at times choose their favorite. I want to stay with mummy, I want to stay with daddy, so on and so forth, because they are emotionally attached to that moment more so. Obviously short-term memory, long-term memory, all of that kind of stuff. So they're more attached to that moment. So they're more likely to favor a parent in those emotional highs. But again, long-term, you want to provide an atmosphere where your child feels safe to love both of you equally. And not only that, but your child feels safe to be raised by both of your different methods equally. Now, this is the thing. If done correctly, co-parenting can be amazing for children. You know, the experiences that they can actually have can be amazing for children. I say this because as a married man, and a father of two children, I was going about life, not to say this was a problem, but very similar to my father in that I was going to work, I was earning money, I was coming home, I was spending a couple of moments with my children, doing what I could to put them to bed, and then, you know, getting up in the morning and repeating the same. When it came to weekends, I would probably favor a moment of rest. I would try to provide a moment of rest to my wife at the time. And then it was, again, just try to survive. And my relationship with my kids was very transactional, right? Which wasn't a problem in the context, and I wasn't intended to keep it that way, but in context, I wasn't, again, provided with maternity. So I had to go. We had to bring in some more money. So it wasn't a decision I was making intentionally, but this is just what I was doing. And of course, the moment separation happened, and by the time I got my order in place, my relationship with my children has changed dramatically because I now do everything. I'm equally as involved. You know, the WhatsApp groups, the parent WhatsApp groups I'm a part of now. You know, the stuff to do with the school runs, the school drops. You know, I've got two girls, so doing their hair, doing their nails, taking them swimming because they're quite young. Taking them wherever, holidays, reading with them after school. I've got them signed up to tennis clubs and they come to church with me. And so we've really, really got our own life. And obviously what I can't do within the context of co-parenting is now sit back and expect their mother to just parent them, because if I do that, they won't want to spend any time with me and they won't have known their father really by the time they become adults. And for me, that was the one thing I was trying to protect. So when we talk about co-parenting, we must understand this is the long game. There's going to be moments where things don't necessarily align with what you wanted and your plans, but you also have to be open to the fact that your kids generally, for the most part, I'm assuming, want to spend time with both parents. Now, if that's not the case immediately, because I'm not always saying it is, there are some parents who just aren't involved. And so, you will have kids saying, well, I don't want to spend time with the parent because they're not involved. And that's fine. However, that's not necessarily an excuse to leave that relationship in that place, right? Long term, by the time that parent is now an adult, it's not just so, oh, I didn't want to spend time with my dad. They were a child. Do you know how many things you don't want to do as a kid, and yet we know we must do them? Otherwise, what are we? Who wants to get out of bed as a kid? No, but we're taught to. Who wants to go to school wearing a tie and a shirt? No one. But we're taught this is the working world. We are taught we must do things that we don't want to. Every morning, I didn't necessarily, as a child, want to brush my teeth, but I was taught to do so. And again, it now becomes habit. So what we can't do as parents is just go, oh yeah, they don't want to see their parents, so therefore I'm going to support that decision. I'm not, from a place where you may not like that parent, I get that. But when you're now objectively looking at your child saying, well, this isn't good for you long term, maybe there is something that we can now do to just introduce perhaps just a little more. Now, let me just interject with this as well. If you are in that position where you have a parent who's actively not involved, and you can talk forever about what they haven't done, perhaps, just perhaps, we can start to move toward something, right? So just be considerate of what you could move toward. I'm telling you this, you'll know this, right? As a parent, it's not easy. Like being a single parent, looking after the kids by yourself is not easy. Even when you're asking for support from family, there's a sense of guilt that either I'm not there for this reason or I keep leaning on other people. So it's just not easy. And why take on all of that if there is another person who is perhaps willing to do so, even if you don't agree upon their method of how they do it? Now, you may not ever agree upon their method, but again, maybe we can just get a little bit closer. And I would say that a key thing here now is communication. Communication is so important. It's fundamental to how your children will be raised. If you were running a business with a business partner that you fell out with, and there's plenty of examples of that across the world, you can't now say, well, I'm not talking to you, because you're essentially shutting down business, right? You're saying, I don't want this to profit anymore. And it's not necessarily you that will suffer immediately, but it will come back around. So keep that in mind, that communication is fundamental when it comes to co-parenting. Now, what I will add on top of that is it's also key to know when to communicate and how to communicate. And I think that is something that boundaries kind of introduce, but it's also about taking your own time and being comfortable with not only what you said, but how you said it and when you said it, right? And it might seem like, oh, this is a lot to think about, but it might well be to start off with. And it doesn't always have to stay that way, but it just means taking a moment. One of the most powerful things I think I've ever learned in my life is, the power of responding and not reacting. It's so easy to react to things that we hear and see, and things that annoy and frustrate us, right? And that's fine. But to react in private is not the same as to react in public. And so have your reaction, but take a moment for your response. Because your response doesn't have to do anything other than pacify the situation or bring peace or even ignore something that perhaps would have brought an unnecessary argument. And let's just put it this way. There are times where you might be right to say something back, right? You might be well within your rights to say something back. But let's be honest, does that actually win you anything? If the person you were dealing with was... Again, and I'm not saying this is the case, but in many instances, if this person you were dealing with was reasonable, then you probably wouldn't be here anyway. So let's assume they're not. Let's assume that logic has left the room, and let's now assume that you have two choices. You're either going to pour some more coal and fuel on that fire, or you're just going to spray some water on it. Make the choice. Now, you might feel like, oh, well, I could have said and I should have said, and you might well be within your rights. Find a good friend and go tell them that, right? But in terms of how you speak to and respond to your ex-partner, do not be drawn in. It is just not worth it, right? So again, this is only on the basis that there's something there, there's something going on that perhaps isn't quite right. It's just these things don't need more, they need peace. And the more peaceable you are, can I just say that if someone really is chasing a bone and constantly grinding you and constantly doing things, it's almost like there is a psychology about it in that the more you entertain it, the more they keep doing it. So if you're able to just hold your peace and not entertain it, you might be surprised at the results that come within a week, within a month, within a year. Now, again, I'm not saying it will happen overnight, but what I am saying is we must always be mindful when it comes to co-parenting that this is really the long game, right? This person, this co-parent is going to be in your life forever, right? So you have to bear in mind, this is the long game. You're going to go through a lot of different experiences together with this person in your life. And that's really special and important moments to your children as well. And you may be nowhere near some of these milestones, or you may be way beyond some of these milestones, but there are some still really important things to happen. And you will now be making choices long term about that. Honestly, I'm just for example, are you thinking about whether or not your grandchildren will call you grandpa or Dave? Think about it, right? Because again, this isn't the video for it. This isn't the conversation for it, but your ex-partner at some point in time may meet someone if they haven't already. And that person will have their own family, their own parents, their own, so by the time your child is now an adult, if they're not already, are they calling this person dad? Are they calling this person mum? And I'm not saying it's a problem, because that just might be the modern family that you have now become, which is, again, great, what we're all aiming for. But are you thinking about how that will look in the future in terms of how you parent today? So I think it's probably best I wrap this up here, because there's a lot more I could talk about in terms of being a good co-parent and some of the things that you should look out for, opportunities to support them. And again, it could be from a distance. This isn't necessarily, if this is still fresh and there's still very much tension, this may not be something you're thinking about, but again, mindfully, your ex-partner has a birthday, your ex-partner's parents have birthdays and they have cousins and other things like that. Are you equipping the children for those things or not? You may not have to. Mother's Day, Father's Day, small things where you can just throw something at your kids to support and demonstrate that, there is a peace amongst you. Again, not the time and not the place for it. I think we'll have another discussion about that in more detail. We'll do a proper discussion on co-parenting in more detail. But hopefully some of these things that I've mentioned are useful tools to just navigate this, this strange place, this strange ecosystem in which you find yourself. It's the good news is that it can really be successful. However, what I would say is, like any relationship, right? Any relationship, any good and healthy relationship that is, it's going to take work, and it's going to take constant work from both of you, right? Both parents need to be actively involved here in order to raise good, healthy, and stable children. So I'm just going to encourage you, lastly, to be peaceful, be peaceable, right? Don't allow everything to stir you, to rile you up, to anger you, to frustrate you. I'm not saying that those emotions don't have their place. You may well be entitled to feel them, but just try to consider, is it going to be helpful for my children if I constantly react to these things?